Jason started cutting the fence of the enclosure of Sombra. He and a group of animal rights activists planned to liberate Sombra from her enclosure. In the middle of the night, they made their way to her. They were prepared to defy the authorities to give Sombra the freedom they believed she deserved. As they approached Sombra's enclosure, their hearts raced with anticipation. They expected Sombra to be relieved. Instead, something else happened. Jason tried to breathe as quietly as possible, but it felt almost impossible. It was pitch black outside, and they couldn't use a lot of light because what they were doing wasn't exactly legal. They were trespassing, so they couldn't risk getting caught, or they would be in a cell just like Sombra. He looked at his partner, Tom, who looked equally stressed as him. They could hear a slight hum as they approached a cage from behind. They couldn't immediately see what was inside, but they just hoped it was Sombra. They had already passed 3 other cages with sleeping lions in them, and if one of them had woken up, they would have definitely made it known to the caregivers by loudly roaring. Step by step, they approached the cage. Finally, when they stood in front of it and saw it was Sombra who was sleeping inside, they could quietly sigh in relief. But the job wasn't done just yet. They still had to figure out a way to free Sombra without waking up all the other animals. And there was one more thing they had to be worried about. Sombra was still a wild animal. What if she became aggressive and charged at Tom and Jason? It was a very dangerous situation, and Jason was very aware of that. He had dressed himself in many layers, hoping to protect his body just in case. His partner, however, wasn't so prepared. He wore a simple black hoodie and jeans. But Jason didn't have the heart to make him even more stressed, so he kept his mouth shut. They crouched down by the cage door and put their backpacks on the ground. Slowly, they zipped them open, trying not to make a sound. They stopped a few times as Sombra suddenly began to move. For a moment, it seemed like she was about to wake up, but they noticed her belly was round, so she had already eaten and was very tired. They reached their hands into their backpacks and slowly took out their tools. They had brought a crowbar and a big pair of bolt cutters to cut open the cage and Sombra's chain. They placed the tools in front of them and paused for a second. Tom gave Jason a look of, "Are we really doing this?" And Jason just sighed and looked at Sombra. They sat there for a minute, and then it was time to get to work. They knew exactly what to do because they had practiced this moment a few days before. They didn't want to risk failing, so it seemed like the best thing to do, and they were glad they did, because now everything went very smoothly. Tom and Jason stood stiffened with terror. They slowly turned their heads to look around the room and noticed how all the other animals were facing them. They were growling softly and breathing very hard at the same time. Tom and Jason knew they had to hurry because the animals were unpredictable. They could suddenly start roaring very loudly, notifying the caregivers something was wrong. They looked back at Sombra and realized she was still lying on the ground, even though her cage door was fully opened. They figured she could be chained very tightly, so they slowly made their way into the cage and stopped as soon as they were crouching down next to Sombra. It was remarkable how calm she was, and Jason and Tom were a little confused by it. They had thought she would be excited and all over the place, trying to break free from her chain to run out of her cage, but she almost seemed a bit unbothered by the whole event. She just sighed very loudly and closed her eyes again to get back to sleep. Jason frowned and looked at Tom, who raised his shoulders in return. Should they keep going? The sound of Sombra's chain falling to the ground triggered another wave of growl echoing through the room, but this time it wasn't so quiet. One of the lions began to roar and even charged at his cage. Tom and Jason fell back onto the ground in shock and hissed at Sombra to make a move, but she refused. She just laid there, not moving an inch. They decided to keep going. Maybe Sombra wasn't realizing it yet, but she sure would as soon as she was freed from her chain. They imagined it would be a big weight lifted from her neck, and as soon as she felt the chain slipping away, she would realize it was time for her to run out of her cage and into the night. What would happen after Sombra was freed from her cage was still a question for Jason and Tom. Her cage was located inside a room at the back of the wildcat sanctuary, so they would have to think of a way to get her through the back door without anyone noticing. There were cameras everywhere, but they just figured if they had managed to get in, they would manage to get out. The sound of Sombra's chain falling to the ground triggered another wave of growl echoing through the room, but this time it wasn't so quiet. One of the lions began to roar and even charged at his cage. Tom and Jason fell back onto the ground in shock and hissed at Sombra to make a move, but she refused. She just laid there, not moving an inch. Jason tried to push Sombra from behind in order to move her out of the cage, but instead of standing up, she turned her head backward and growled at Jason. It was an aggressive growl, one that doesn't have to be repeated as she would be biting on your arm by then. Jason immediately stopped and looked at Tom with tears in his eyes. The barely audible hum from the outside combined with the menacing growls from the big cats, each resonating like a ghostly serenade. The darkness was thick, punctuated only by the dim moonlight filtering through the roof. Jason's heart raced, the sound of it almost drowning the dangerous murmurs around them. In this nearly blind world, he could feel Tom's anxious presence beside him and the weight of Sombra's gaze upon them. Tom leaned closer to Jason, their faces mere inches apart, trying to relay a plan. "We need to think quickly," he whispered, his voice shaky yet determined. Shadows played tricks on their minds, the outlines of the big cats seemingly larger, more intimidating. Each time one growled or shifted, both men froze, the risk of detection a constant threat. Their whispered strategy session was like trying to converse during a haunting lullaby. The great cat before them remained motionless, her eyes reflecting a deep-seated emotion that was difficult to interpret. Despite the danger, there was a serenity to Sombra. While the world around her stirred in agitation, she was an island of stillness. The contrast was unsettling. Tom and Jason shared puzzled glances, wondering how a wild creature, given the chance of freedom, could be so indifferent. Jason's emotions surged, threatening to overwhelm him. The hope they'd harbored, the plan they'd painstakingly formed, all seemed to crumble before this unexpected hurdle. Sobs threatened and tears began to spill, coursing down his face. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Their noble intention to free Sombra now seemed like a naive dream, and the weight of despair was as palpable as the walls of the cage surrounding them. Tom, ever the pillar of strength, placed a reassuring hand on Jason's shoulder. "We came here with a purpose, and we can't lose sight of that now," he urged. There had to be a way to reach Sombra, to make her understand. Tom's resolve, his quiet determination, brought fleeting glimmers of hope to the dark room. They needed to regroup, rethink, and react, and they needed to do it quickly. The chamber seemed to close in on them, the air thick with tension. Each sound, an agitated scratch, a low growl or a rustle, was magnified in the oppressive silence. Jason's deep sobs provided a haunting backdrop, reflecting the swirling vortex of anxiety that gripped them. Time felt distorted, and the minutes felt like hours, with both men trapped in this echo chamber of uncertainty. Tom's mind raced back to their preparation days. They'd read about pumas, their habitats and behaviours, seeking to understand their subject better. He recalled stories of wild animals forming strong bonds with places or caretakers. Could Sombra have formed such a bond here? He wondered. Perhaps their assumptions about her life in captivity had been too one-dimensional. Recognizing the sensitivity of the situation, Jason and Tom contemplated how to persuade the stubborn puma. Their actions had to be cautious, ensuring they didn't escalate the already heightened emotions of the room. Any mistake could be catastrophic, not just for them but for all the creatures in that chamber. Tom pulled out a small pack of meat from his backpack, a last-minute addition they'd brought to distract any potentially aggressive animals. Holding it out tentatively, he inched toward Sombra, hoping the familiar scent would motivate her. Jason watched with bated breath, silently praying the offering would be the key to their escape. To their dismay, Sombra's reaction was minimal. She glanced at the meat, then back at Tom, her deep-set eyes unreadable. There was a hint of recognition, perhaps even understanding, but she remained unmoving. Her indifference was a silent proclamation. She wasn't trapped, she was home. The realization hit Jason and Tom like a ton of bricks. The weight of their presumptions bore down on them, reshaping their mission's very foundation. The soft echo of footsteps grew steadily louder, a heartbeat rhythm that sent adrenaline pumping through their veins. Sanctuary staff were returning. Tom and Jason exchanged wide-eyed glances, realizing the implications of getting caught. The enormity of their situation was closing in on them, making the sanctuary's vastness feel like a tightening trap. Time was of the essence. Their every move, every decision now had consequences that could change the course of their mission and possibly their lives. The once dim-lit paths began to reveal escape routes, but with each passing second, those routes were becoming more perilous. "We have to make a move," Tom whispered urgently, trying to hatch a quick plan. With the returning caretakers, lights started flickering on, illuminating the sanctuary's intricate layout. Each bulb that lit up revealed another cage, another pair of watchful eyes, another growl, making the duo's evasion more arduous. The play of light and shadow became a cruel game, offering both refuge and exposure in equal measure. In their frantic search for an exit, the pair stumbled upon a small storeroom. Inside, rows of tranquilizer darts and corresponding guns lined the shelves. Tom's fingers traced over them, a grim realization dawning. "They've been sedating them," he whispered, the bitterness evident in his voice. The discovery painted a darker picture of the sanctuary's practices. The ticking clock and the footsteps nearing left them in a quandary. They had the means to sedate Sombra temporarily, allowing them to maneuver her out of the cage and complete their mission. Yet, the ethics of such an action weighed heavily on them. Jason's face was torn between anxiety and morality. "Is this what it has come to?" he asked, desperation seeping into his voice. Tom, ever the realist, pulled Jason close. "We might not have another choice," he breathed, trying to quell his own doubts. The looming threat of being discovered and the echoing growls from the cages underscored their predicament. This was about more than just freeing Sombra. It was about exposing the sanctuary's hidden truths. Gulping hard, Jason nodded. "All right, but we need to be careful," he murmured, apprehension evident in his eyes. Taking a deep breath, he prepared himself for what was to come. Their roles had shifted from rescuers to reluctant enforcers, a shift neither had anticipated or desired. Tom carefully loaded a dart into the tranquilizer gun, his hands betraying a slight tremor. The weight of his decision pressed heavily on his shoulders. Taking a cautious aim at Sombra, he hoped for a clean shot. Jason watched with bated breath, the silence amplifying the tension in the air. The dart's release was barely audible, a soft whoosh followed by a muted thud as it embedded itself into Sombra's flank. The powerful Puma flinched, but didn't react violently. Within moments, her once alert stance began to waver, her eyes growing heavy and her body slowly starting to sag. As Sombra's form settled onto the cage floor, the urgency of their mission was refreshed in their minds. The tranquilizer's effects wouldn't last long, and they needed to act fast. Each second ticked away menacingly, a reminder that the path to freedom was fraught with unexpected challenges and moral dilemmas. Watching closely, Tom and Jason could see Sombra's chest rising and falling in a steady, rhythmic manner. The powerful creature's vibrant energy had been momentarily stilled, her imposing aura subdued by the tranquilizer. Her eyelids drooped, shielding her fierce eyes as she entered a transient state of reprieve. As Sombra's energy diminished, an inverse reaction stirred among the other big cats. Lions, leopards and jaguars grew restless in their cages, their roars and growls forming a cacophonous symphony of disapproval. The once serene sanctuary transformed into a veritable maelstrom, with every feline displaying their displeasure. Amidst the roiling chorus of feline discontent, the two men sprang into action. They knew their window was limited, with Sombra's tranquilization being temporary and the caretaker's approach imminent. Their hands worked quickly, deftly trying to undo the bindings that held Sombra captive. But the urgency of their actions had unintended consequences. The rapid movements, combined with the discontented growls around them, only served to further agitate the sanctuary's residents. Cages rattled and roars amplified, creating a tumultuous backdrop to their already tense endeavour. Tom's fingers closed around the final chain link that held Sombra prisoner. It was cold, unyielding, and seemingly unbreakable. Jason joined him, the two pooling their efforts, hoping to release the majestic creature from her shackles once and for all. The duo pulled, twisted, and tugged, but the chain wouldn't budge. Their frustrations grew, hands becoming slick with sweat as they wrestled with the metal. The once simple goal of freeing Sombra now seemed an insurmountable challenge. Driven by a concoction of fear, determination, and sheer adrenaline, they intensified their efforts. With every ounce of strength and a surge of determination, they felt the chain give way just slightly, a hint that victory was possible. With one final concerted effort, the chain snapped, falling to the ground with a resonant clang. Sombra, though sedated, was free. The symbolic weight of the broken chain was not lost on Tom and Jason, as it represented their small victory in a larger battle. Even as they revelled in their fleeting success, the distant wail of alarms began to pierce the air. The sanctuary was now on high alert, signalling that their actions had indeed been detected. The path to escape, already treacherous, had just become even more daunting. Sombra's freedom brought another challenge, moving her. The sedated Puma, while majestic, was undeniably heavy. They needed to transport her safely and discreetly, a feat made more complicated by her tranquilized state. Each step became a testament to their commitment to her cause. Tom and Jason, weighed down by the gravity of their actions, heard the distinct echo of footsteps growing louder. With Sombra beside them, they darted their eyes around, desperately searching for a place to hide. Shadows cast by the sanctuary's cages offered fleeting concealment options. Ducking behind a large enclosure, they crouched low, their breaths shallow and rapid. Through a thin gap, they observed the caretakers, figures of authority and concern, assessing the chaos, their faces displaying a mix of disbelief and anger. Their sanctuary was short-lived. A jostled cage, or perhaps an inadvertent sound, gave them away. The moment of discovery was electric with tension, eyes locking onto one another, conveying a wealth of emotions that words could scarcely capture. Bright overhead lights suddenly illuminated the area, casting Tom and Jason sharply into focus. The dark pockets of the sanctuary were erased, leaving them exposed, cornered, and without a clear route of escape. Their hearts sank, realizing the gravity of their predicament. Desperation evident in their eyes, they raised their hands in a gesture of surrender. With voices choked with emotion, they tried to convey their intentions. "Please, just let us explain," Tom implored, hoping reason would prevail in the heat of the moment. The surrounding atmosphere was thick with tension, yet, as the duo spoke, the expressions on the caretakers' faces morphed. From hard lines of anger, there were subtle shifts towards understanding, though skepticism remained. An older seasoned caretaker stepped forward, his demeanour more composed than the rest. "Speak," he commanded, offering them a sliver of hope, a chance to bridge the chasm of misunderstanding. With a rush of words, Tom and Jason narrated their perspective, their motivations, their desperate acts. In return, the caretakers offered their own narrative, a tale of commitment to the animals, of efforts made to ensure their well-being. The lead caretaker gestured around, painting a vivid picture of the sanctuary's mission. "We've always wanted the best for Sombra," he emphasized. "Every chain, every cage was a means to protect, never to harm." Hearing the sanctuary's side, Tom and Jason felt a sinking realization. Their noble intentions, while genuine, might have been misguided. The weight of doubt bore down on them as they began to question their actions and the ripple effects they had caused. One of the caretakers, with tears glistening, began recounting the tale of a young puma cub found injured and alone. That was Sombra, he whispered. Her family had tragically perished, leaving her vulnerable to the harsh realities of the wild. As the caretaker continued, he painted a vivid picture of Sombra's life within the sanctuary walls. Every meal, every treatment, every gesture of kindness was recounted. She was more than just another animal here, he said, his voice choked with emotion. She was family. The depth of connection between Sombra and her caregivers became evident. She'd come running at the sound of our footsteps, purring in her unique way. Another caretaker chimed in. Tom and Jason, in their haste, had overlooked these profound relationships. The senior caretaker took a deep breath, emphasizing their purpose. We're here to give them a chance, a life they might have lost outside, to protect, to love, and never to imprison. The sanctuary's ethos was clear. It was a haven, not a cage, a hard lesson. The weight of the revelations pressed heavily on Tom and Jason. Their eyes, once filled with fiery conviction, now shimmered with remorse. Their good intentions had blinded them to the sanctuary's truth, leading to actions that could have caused irreversible harm. Tom whispered, "What have we done?" As Jason looked on, lost in thought. The magnitude of their misguided endeavour settled in, leaving a heavy silence. Their regret was palpable, the weight of their actions pressing down. They knew they had to make amends, to channel their passion for animals in the right direction. "We need to do better, to learn and understand before acting," Jason mused, considering their future in the world of animal activism. Turning to the caretakers, Tom voiced their newfound admiration. "Your dedication, your love for these animals, it's inspiring." Their words were heartfelt, acknowledging the immense responsibility the sanctuary staff shouldered. "We will share the truth about sanctuaries like this," Jason vowed. Together, they pledged to be advocates, to educate and inspire others about the nuances of conservation and the sanctity of places like the sanctuary. With heavy hearts but a renewed sense of purpose, Tom and Jason departed. The sanctuary, once a symbol of confinement in their eyes, now stood as a beacon of hope. Their journey had taken a turn, but it was only the beginning of their advocacy story.